Welcome everybody to the welcome everyone to the Wisconsin Maritime Museum. My name is Serena. I'm the Collections and Archives Manager here, and I'm so excited to welcome you all to this month's Think and Drink. So Think and Drink is a free monthly speaker series that happens on the first Thursday evening of every month. This year, we are holding a year of free talks around the topic of ice. So ice is a defining feature of maritime history and the history of Wisconsin, and there are so many dynamic stories frozen in ice. So the program is sponsored in part by a grant from the Green Bay Packers Foundation. If you enjoy this program and want to keep them free and accessible to all, please consider joining the Wisconsin Maritime Museum as a member or donating to the museum. One last reminder, if you have not already done so, please remember to put your phone on silent so we can all enjoy the program. And please save all questions and comments for the end of the program. So with that, I'm going to do a quick little introduction. So Mike Peters has been sailing both soft and hard water all his life, racing scows and yachts across the world's oceans. His sailing career includes working on the 1987 Heart of America trial boats and over 40 years as a merchant mariner holding a 1600 master license. So Mike has worked on research vessels, tugs, excursion boats, and private yachts. Deb Whitehorse grew up in Monona, Wisconsin, surrounded by the legendary ice sailors of the Four Lakes Ice Yacht Club. Her deep passion for ice sailing has taken her across the globe from Montana to Maine, Scandinavia, Northern Europe, and Lake Baikal in Russia. And with that, I will turn things over to Deb and Mike.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Mike.
Yes.
I'd like to thank the Wisconsin Maritime Museum for having us and inviting us. And thank you, Mike, for joining in. And could we hit the next slide? And Sabrina gave that nice introduction to Mike. And I'd just like to point out that there's a very nice picture of Mike when you were 3 years old at the tiller of, what boat was that, Mike?
So the boat at that time was the Maybid, which was owned by my dad, and right out in front of my house on Lake Winnebago in Oshkosh. And that boat nowadays is owned by Eric Schlamer out of Lake Geneva, called Taku. So it's still going yet, and originally built by the Buckstaffs back in the 1920s.
Yep, and I think we might have a picture of Taku coming up. Next, please. And there was my bio, and there I am standing with my brother. We grew up in ice sailing. Our father was a Skeeter builder and racer, and there we are in 2020 at the World Championship Junior Ice Sailing competition in Sweden. That was a real fun time. Next, please. So I'm going to talk a little about the early history, and then I'm going to hand it off to Mike on his specialty is stern steerers. He knows everything and other things about ice boating. So the Dutch are acknowledged as the grandfathers of ice sailing. Ice boats show up in their artwork during a period that was known as the Little Ice Age. They were the first to put a crosspiece on their working boats and cast iron runners. And I have been on those boats. They still exist. And they were working boats. They would go down the canals, deliver bread and whatnot. And then they were also for pleasure as well. Very beautiful boats. Next, please. So the Dutch were famous for ice boating, and I was surprised to learn a few years ago that Ben Franklin, he wrote the Dutch and asked for ice boat plans, and he got them. There's no indication that a Dutch ice boat was ever built in the United States, but Ben Franklin was kind of a cool guy, and he was thinking about ice boats. Ice boating attracts a lot of creative people. In one of the letters, James Madison also rode in an ice boat in Holland, but he hated it, and he wrote a letter saying it almost killed him, the cold. So we like Ben. Next, please. So as I said, we really don't have any examples of Dutch-style ice yachts being built in North America. However, North Americans took their inspiration from the Forerunner sleigh and buckboard wave.
Your speaker is horrible over here.
Stand by,
Hi
Deb.
guys, we're having a little technical difficulty. Just give us a second.
Pete?
Reconnecting the virtual side of things. Just give us a moment. All right.
You can do it.
And that's always how it goes. You practice, and then
What? Doesn't make sense. We do apologize too for the speaker feedback. It is a notorious gremlin in this room at the moment, and it happens when we're virtually connecting to somebody presenting virtually. So that's the feedback coming through the system. We're working on that. That's why if the Packers gave us, maybe twice as much money, we could have been able to do it. But they've done some tech checks and are adjusting that. Well, we were, you have to dial it in just so, but even so, it's one of those that it's 2025. Yeah, 2025.
We went to the moon 60 years ago. You can't believe it. Come on, you're killing it.
We have to actually get up there inside of this ceiling and have to rewire it. That's part of it.
And they came back.
Hi, I'm back. Sorry, a little technical difficulty.
There you go, Deb.
It helps to actually power up your iPad, I found out. Anyway, so the Dutch style ice boats were never built here. There was people on, specifically Zadok Southwick, and this is from research from others that I've learned. He was basically the first guy that kind of looked at his wagon, looked at a sleigh, and said, I might have some fun out on out on the ice. So thus the Hudson River style ice yacht was born, and it's the most popular stern steer around, wouldn't you, Mike?
Yes, oh, very definitely.
Okay, and next, please. And so I'm just going to talk about some social history, people that are marginally affiliated with ice boating. One being Frank Lloyd Wright. He grew up here in Madison. He spent his boyhood, and he grew up on Lake Mendota. He went to Lincoln School right on Lake Mendota, and I can only imagine looking out and seeing all the ice boats, zooming around. Must have been really tough to concentrate on studies. There was a boat, the Bernard family, Carl and William Bernard, sailed, built, rented ice boats in Madison for years, very famous. There's a picture of their rental fleet in the early 1900s. Frank Lloyd Wright also was in his biography. He said he made an ice boat model. And so I have some ice boat models in the bottom there that were built by Carl Bernard. Next, please. Charles Lindbergh, he's another guy with with ice boating connections. He briefly attended University of Wisconsin. He liked hanging out with the ice boaters, probably more than going to college. And I think he had to leave because he didn't go to school much. He put an airplane propeller on a stern steer and went around the lake. His cousin was also Archie Lodge, who had helped invent the DN ice yacht and had built the Deuce too, I think, part of that syndicate. And so Lindbergh would have known about ice boats. And this was before he made his transatlantic journey. And he was also credited for coming up with some innovations on a stern steer known as the Deuce, which we will talk about later. Next, please. There's some pretty historic trophies in the stern steer world. One is the Stewart Trophy on the left, deeded in 1903 by the Kalamazoo Ice Yacht Club. Still sailed for today, though it's been a few years since they've done it. And on the right is a beautiful trophy that was deeded by William Randolph Hearst, of all people. One of I think the Commodore of the Kalamazoo Ice Yacht Club sent him a telegram and said, hey, wouldn't it be a good idea if you sponsored an ice boat trophy? And he agreed. And so they sent some money and they had that beautiful trophy. Do you have anything to add about the Stewart and Hearst, Mike?
So the Hearst and Stewart cups came about way back in the day. Ice boats had up to 850 square feet of sail. So one trophy originally was deeded for sailing up into that range. And then the other trophy was for like 450 and under on the square footage of sail area. Now the A stern steers, which are our largest boats, anywhere from 350 to 550 square feet, race for these two cups.
Next, please. Evinrude. Mike, you want to talk about the Evinrude ice boats?
Sure. So the Evinrude ice boats came about back in the 1920s, and interesting history on Evinrude Motors, which actually was the company that was building the Evinrude ice boat. And Evinrude and a gentleman by the name of Chris Meyer originally owned Evinrude boat motors. Meyer bought out Evinrude in the 20s. And that is when the Evinrude ice boat came about. It was built for about 5 years down in Milwaukee area. And they were very similar to the Johnson ice boats, which was a totally different company built up in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. As far as I know, there's only one existing Evinrude boat still sailing.
Yeah, and that's a Lake Winnebago boat. Spindler?
Yes, that is out of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, called the Spindler.
Yeah. Next, please. And now Lake Winnebago history. Take it away, Mike.
So here we are on the Great Lake Winnebago, which was the capital for ice boating for many years. The size of the lake, the history going all the way back into the lumberjack era, where the lumberjacks used to sail the boats and so-called terrorize the towns at night and use the boats during the day. The farmers, the lumberjacks, for moving cargo back and forth across the lake. Lake Winnebago is approximately 10 miles wide and 35 miles long. So there's a lot of area, a lot of ice. It was an average of anywhere from 15 to 25 inches thick in a normal winter. It had huge cracks that would form, so the boats had to be built heavy. Eventually, the sailing and racing started. The earliest trophy, which we have here tonight, was 1878. It was a Bowen trophy here, which has just recently been found, and we're going to try to clean her up and try to get it back in circulation again. So the Evinrude boat was raced extensively There was a famous boat that went all the way up until the 40s until it was finally burned, and it won a lot of the Hearst and Stewart Cups. In the meantime, as you can see from this picture, it's a very good picture depicting the evolution of ice boating. You can see the first boat, the B12 there. It's got a real short gaff on the top there. And then next to it is a full Marconi rig. And so the people were starting to think about going from the gaff to the Marconi, but they're still a little iffy on it yet. Well, needless to say, the gaff got thrown away, and the Marconi is now the standard for all ice boats. And but this is one of the early races where they're all stern steers. The Skeeters, the bow steer boats, did not come about until the 1930s. So the stern steers had a long run at it. So Lake Winnebago, the stern steers was really kind of the birthplace for a lot of the stern steers, or the Midwest also, as Deb was saying, down in Madison. But a lot of the boats that came into the Midwest were actually out east, out in Poughkeepsie. And when the icebreakers came in about 1901, there was no longer any ice boating there. So a lot of those boats were sold and then came to our Midwest. Go ahead, Deb.
Yep, next, please.
So we're back on Lake Winnebago here, and this is just an early 1900s picture of stern steers. You see the gaff rig, of course, and then the low squatty rigs. And you know, the other thing that's very evident in this picture here with the side view is how far back the runner planks were in those boats. And so they used to spin or flicker very easily. Their balance point was all out of whack on these boats back then. Since then, the planks are much further forward. The whole rig is forward, and it makes it a much more stable boat.
Next, please.
So sailing on Winnebago again, and the real key item in this particular photo is you'll note a barrel on the boat number 16. This barrel hanging from the mast, which has a flag implanted in it, was one of the original race marks that they used to use for the racing. And also the race courses were more of a reach broadside to the wind, because of the style of the boats, they couldn't sail upwind like they do nowadays. And another thing to note on this picture is the amount of snow on the ice. These boats had an incredible amount of power with their gaff rigs, so they could sail in much more extreme conditions versus the boats of today. Next. So one of our most famous sailors in the ice boating world was John Buckstaff. He won everything in the stern steers. I don't think he ever set foot in a bow steer, probably, but his name to fame was sailing the boat, the Debutante, and which the boat is still in existence. It's out of Menominee, Michigan now. It's only on it. The boat itself, built in 1914, was originally gaff rigged, which we'll have a photo coming up here of the boat. It was built gaff rigged. It was built out in Poughkeepsie, New York, and it was by the famous Buckhout family. And then it was shipped to Madison, Wisconsin for its maiden voyage, and on a flat car. That was the only way you could move boats back in those days. The Deb was approximately, at that time, it was about 44 feet long, and now it's 48 feet long. It was lengthened in the 1930s. And then also in this picture, you'll see a advertisement here, kind of a comic strip advertisement for Camel cigarettes, just to show you how times have changed. You know, when you're short of breath or anything like that, light up a Camel. So, and of course, Buckstaff, he was so famous at the time. And I mean, the Camel cigarettes, he was also advertising the wood burning stoves, and he had his name on a lot of stuff. Plus, the main company was building exquisite furniture. Next. Great shot here. This is on board the Debutante, and you can just kind of see the race record here. It's mainly a promotion with John Buckstaff here, you know, everything that he won. And the interesting thing is, you know, John Buckstaff did not own the Debutante. So it was originally ordered and owned by the Van Dyke brothers, which had the Debutante, and then they also had the Flying Dutchman, and not Dutchman, Dutchmen, men meaning the two brothers. So kind of interesting. And both, the Dutchman is still also around. That's on Lake Winnebago still, and down in Fond du Lac now. So in this particular photo here, we have the sailors there with the Hearst and Stewart cup sitting in the cockpit of the Deb. Next. So we got the Bluebill. The Bluebill goes all the way back in the 1920s. That was actually a Buckstaff owned boat. They built it there in their furniture factory originally, and it was kind of a Buckstaff's experimental boat. The picture on the left there, it shows it's actually an inline hull or fuselage, and it had no baskets on it, which most of the boats are depicting here in this show tonight. And of course, it's got only one sail on it. It's cat rigged in this particular configuration, no jib, trying to make the boat go faster and faster. And the other thing that's very unique on that particular boat at that time was the runner plank actually went through the hull of the boat. So you actually had to take a chock, which holds the runner on. You had to take the chock off, push the runner plank through the hull, and then reattach the chock and of course the runners. And Buckstaff was an incredible innovator. They tried all kinds of crazy stuff. And so when the Bluebill hull broke, then it went to the conventional baskets, which a lot of your big stern steers have now, which would be on Taku here on the right-hand side. Next. Okay, here we are with the Debutante. So built 1914 by the Buckhout family out of Poughkeepsie, New York, bought by the Van Dykes, shipped to Madison on a railroad car, and that was where her first regatta was, first race in Lake Mendota. Then she was eventually moved up to Oshkosh on Lake Winnebago. But looking at these pictures here, you look at the 1914 gaff rig, that was her full rig. It was about 550 square feet of sail at that time, gaff rigged, usually carried 2 to 3 people on board for crew. Then you go to the tall rig on the far right. So Buckstaff says, that gaff rig is slow. We got to go and do something different. And so then they put a 50-foot mast on this boat, which only had a 30-foot mast with a ton of sail. And they did that. And surprisingly or interesting is the boat was stored in the Buckstaff lumber yard, and a truck backed into the mast and broke it, the top of it. And they fixed it, sailed it like that, and they found the boat was much more controllable. So to this day, that's the length of the mast on the boat. Next. So we're back on the early ice here, and all gaff rig boats. You notice how clear the ice is, absolutely gorgeous, snow free, which is just incredible nowadays, more so than ever it seems. And these boats back then, they weighed anywhere from 1,000 to 2,500 pounds, so you got a lot of weight there. Next. So here is an absolutely incredible video here. My good friend Andy Grattan was crewing. This was done in the 1990s. They were sailing a D stern steer, which you actually sit in the hull. It's an inline fuselage, and the individual which built it, Don Ward, was sailing the boat. It was the last time he ever sailed, and it was at the Northwest Regatta in Oshkosh, and it was extremely windy, and they were coming up to that top pin, which is when you're sailing upwind, and then you got to go downwind, and so all of a sudden you're moving the wind, which was in front of you, to behind you, and the boat went up into this horrendous hike. And will we be able to play this quick video? Okay, let's play that. So here they are. They're coming up to the mark. Andy's in the stern cockpit. Don Ward's in the forward, steering the boat. There's coming around the mark. Now he's going from upwind to downwind. That's where the wind really it really powers up. This is where you get your extreme speeds. Poor old Rosemary, the name of the boat, just didn't want to tip over. And if you'll note there, the skipper, he was up in his 70s at the time. He kind of fell out and literally fell on his head. And but it was one of those shots that there was a great photographer there at the right time, and she just wanted, and she just tried and tried to save it. And needless to say, she tipped over. And that boat just celebrated its 50th birthday about 6 years ago. So anyways, but life gets a little exciting on an iceboat some days, especially coming from that top pin or the upwind to downwind rounding. So, okay, next. Okay, the Flying Dutchman. I mentioned it earlier. That was a Van Dyke boat also, but Buckstaff built the boat back in the 1920s, and it was actively raced. It's won the Hearst and Stewart Cup. It's won numerous championships throughout its life. The boat now is on Lake Winnebago, and it's in Fond du Lac. And when we do have ice conditions, it does come out. In about 1960, it had a modern, taller mast put on it with Dacron sails, and there was a new actual backbone built by for Chuck Nevitt, which owned it at the time. And so it's actually one of our semi-newer stern steers out there. It's had a lot of money put in it. A while back, they had a new cross member or runner plank built for the boat. I think it's now like 30 feet long, versus 24 feet in its original configuration. The one thing that's happened with all these stern steers is when they went from the old cotton sails, which traditionally only have about 50% efficiency, because of the weave of the material, the wind would blow right through it. So you lost a lot of horsepower. Well, then Dacron sails come along, and it's like putting that turbocharger, supercharger on your car. All of a sudden, you got a ton of horsepower, and these poor old frail boats some of them didn't really like it too much, So they had to do a lot of rebuilding and everything when they went to the Dacron. And of course, now we're up to carbon fiber sails, which is almost 100% efficiency on it's just the wind just does not go through the sail at all. So times have changed. Next. If we can start the video, please. So this is during the 1930s on Lake Winnebago, and this is some of the early bow steer ice boats. That is what they call a Class C boat, and it had like 175 square feet of sail. They called them the American Legion or the Oshkosh Yacht Club in the background in Oshkosh. And there is the Deuce. That is one of the earliest pictures of the Deuce sailing. This would have been a Northwest ice boat regatta there. So that's why you're seeing the bow steers and the stern steers there, because all classes raced. And so the Deuce had to come from Detroit at that time all the way to Oshkosh. And of course, they're not sailing a jib on it in this particular picture. And this little boat here, Edna, is one of the earliest bow steer boats still in existence. It is now a coffee table in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and a friend's enclosed patio. Makes an absolute great bar. So, but Edna's just a joy to sail, but times have changed considerably since then. And you're just getting a little bit of joyriding here, it looks like, and a little bit of port starboard sailing. It might be some racing going on. But these big Skeeters here, they thought the more sail they could put on these boats, the faster they would go. Well, that's not really the case anymore. The sails have actually got higher, narrower, less foots. Like now they're down to less than 75 square feet of sail, and these boats are going over 100 plus mile an hour. And but these early Skeeters here, the big ones with the big sail on them, they were called flying coffins in the day. And you see how wide the runner plank is. Well, when that boat hiked or tipped, you went up with it because you're sitting over the runner plank. So, and then if they did tip over, then the mast usually broke and it wasn't good. So, thus the name, the coffin. So, And there was a number of those built, but they had a short life. And just days, the days, people used to come out on the ice. There used to be cars out there. I got a picture at home. It shows over 50 cars all sitting on the ice watching the races. Now you can't even, we just can push our trailers on, and so, and everyone, it was a family event, and, they brought their animals out there. And of course, you noticed the dress back then. I mean, it was pretty formal. And it just, in ice boating at its heyday, I mean, back then you just didn't have all the other sports and everything and things to do. So, and of course, helmets, there were the helmets didn't really evolve or come around until after World War II. Then you started to see a few helmets left over from mainly the flyers. And so some of that stuff came on the market then in the war surplus. Because you can always tell by looking at the cars kind of what the vintage of the film is. And everyone just gathered, and because so often you'd usually see a cigarette or a lot of people were smoking then just because of Buckstaff's promoting the Camel cigarettes. And here's the Debutante back in her heyday there. There you got it. See, the reason you're bouncing on a plank here is when the boat sits for a while, the runners will get sticky on the ice. So you bounce the boat a little bit, and that breaks her loose. Then you can push the boat with one finger. And of course, there we got Lindbergh flying over, it looks like, so checking the ice out. So anyways, so much for that. But yeah, I mean, we had a lot of planes always flying out there. And of course, the DN had not been, which is the world's biggest ice boat class now. It has not been developed yet. They came along in the late 30s there, and that came out of Detroit. Here they are with the Deuce. No, this is the Debutante. This is the first aluminum mast. It was basically a TV tower with a lot of stays on it. And needless to say, it took off. The boat went a couple hundred feet and the whole works collapsed. But like I said earlier, John Buckstaff was constantly trying new things. And of course, the America's Cup back then with the water boats, they were playing around with some of this aluminum mast and everything. But Buckstaff said, well, I can build it lighter, and we'll just kind of build it all a bunch of tubes and lots of wires. And it didn't work. So, and the sails back then, they were heavy canvas. I mean, everything was just big and heavy on these boats. But you had the people. You had the people that move these big boats around. So, okay, next. Okay, we have the Fritz here. The Fritz is still going strong, and that boat is based out of Lake Geneva now. It's and that was built in the late 1930s in Madison, and it was one of the fastest boats for her time, and it's still a very fast boat. And anyways, the Fritz is approximately 40 feet long and 24 feet wide. It's got a large wing spar on it. Sails a crew of 2 people on board, and it's considered a small A stern steer. Next. So this is a original build sheet for the Fritz, and you can kind of look at it yourselves there and see what the costs and the labor rates and everything were back then. And of course, the whole boat was built out of Sitka spruce, which now is anywhere from $8 to $12 a board foot. And I mean, you could build these boats very reasonable, at the time. It was a lot of cheap labor, reasonable labor, and materials were very reasonable at the time. Next. So one of the most famous modern day stern steers, and this boat really shook up the stern steer world when it came out in the late 40s. I remember my dad was racing then at the time, and they just said when it was light to medium air, the Mary B would just blow everything away. And the boat was light. It was small. It was only 39 feet long versus most all the other boats are in the 40 to 50 foot range. and the boat just sailed tremendously well in it because it had a great skipper, Carl Bernard, and it was the person, O.T. Havey, which was an electrical contractor in Madison. He actually ordered the boat, had it custom built and everything, and he owned it all the way up until the 1970s, and then the boat has changed hands, and now the Mary B is part of the Madison group there, the Mary B Foundation. So the boat's in very good condition. It goes around the shows, summer and winter, promoting the sport of ice boating.
I have a couple of things to add on that. So that boat was built in Madison by Frank Tetzloff, and he also has a Frank Lloyd Wright connection. So he obviously, Frank Tetzloff would have been a contemporary to the Bernards and hung out at the Bernard Boat Shop. When Frank Lloyd Wright was building the Unitarian Meeting House Church in Madison, it had a very complicated roof design, and nobody could figure out how to build it. Well, somehow they found Frank Tetzloff, the master carpenter who built the Mary B. He's the one that was able to translate those plans and build that roof. So that's just a kind of an interesting social history. Next.
Okay, we got the Deuce, which is the world's largest ice boat. It is probably one of the prettiest boats out there. It's been totally restored by Rick Henning out of Racine, Wisconsin. I mean, there was absolutely no expense spared on this boat. I mean, it's sails whenever we have enough or thick enough ice for the boat. Everything on it just shines. But going all the way back into the 30s when the Deuce was originally built, there were two boats, the Deuce and then Ferdinand the Bull. They're almost identical boats in looking at them, but the Ferdinand is only 40 feet long versus the Deuce is 54 feet long. And so we had a light air boat and a heavy air boat, for racing in the cups. And but the Deuce is what really changed ice boating a lot. And it came out of Detroit. It had a lot of good engineering in it, from the auto industry and just everything in the aeronautical industry. I mean, it had the best in it. And to this day, it's still a very top line modern stern steer. Interesting, when the Deuce came out, that gave Buckstaff the incentive. Now we need to modernize the Debutante. So they threw the gaff rig away, and that's when the 50-foot mast went on the Deb to get something comparable to the Deuce. Well, and that helped. That helped considerably. So now all of a sudden, this old 1914 stern steer is right up there with a modern 1930s boat. So needless to say, both boats have survived. The Deuce, approximately 15 years ago, had a brand new backbone or hull built, all out of Sitka spruce again. And I mean, it's only had the best care, and it's just a great boat to see in action. Next. So here is the original owner of the Deuce here. He got Claire Jacobs, and then George Hendry also was always sailing with him. And you can kind of see, and a lot of people see the gentleman forward in the cockpit with the wheel. That wheel is used for trimming the mainsail. So there's a cable through numerous pulleys or block and tackle that to trim the mainsail in and out. But that guy will be turning the wheel as the boat is sailing to trim the mainsail. Then you look in the skipper there to the right there. He has a tiller in his right hand that steers this big gal. And then there's a box in the middle there also, and that was a ratchet also, and that would trim the jib. So that configuration is still very similar in the Deuce now, almost 100 years later. Still got a big winch up forward yet, and they got a person that trims the jib and a person that drives the boat. So next. Okay, we got a video. So this is showing what our current owner, Rick Henning, has done with the Deuce. Everything from setting the boat up to making it with the modern sails and rigging to make the boat. He basically tamed the beast, because the Deuce was a handful to sail. And you'll see by this video here, I mean, they just make it look like child's play. So go ahead. So here they're coming down on the ice. So you can see the trailer here, everything, you know. I mean, everything is just big with this boat. You know, they got a 3/4-ton pickup pulling it, and here she's all loaded on the trailer. And you literally, they have a crane that is built right on the trailer, and where you can put the mast up, you can unload the boat, do everything. You actually take the sails out of the box with the crane and put this, you know, help put the sails on. I mean, there's a brand new runners there, you know, like 6-7 feet long. I mean, the paint job on here is flawless. Just everything about the boat is just impeccable. And here she's rolling along. I'm pretty sure this was done on Lake Mendota here.
Yep.
Of course, they got a few extra people on board that day, just showing how big the cockpit is. We just watched their heads. The ice was a little bit rough that day. Of course, that skull and crossbones is probably not too far fetched there. Of course, now the Deuce, I mean, you can fly a runner on it, hike, and you know that plank is 34 feet long, so you got a lot of boat ahead of you when you're. And you'll notice that open cockpit rolling along 70, 80 mile an hour. There's no seat belts. There's no brakes. It's just a very great day. A great photographer there shooting, putting her up in the hike. I mean, it was kind of a play day there when they did this. And but everything about this boat is just big and massive. When you hear her coming down the ice, she just rumbles. You know, it's just.
Yeah, and the green paint, it's always had green paint. And the reason it does is because when Claire Jacobs built it in the 30s, he really wasn't concerned with how it looked. He was more concerned with how it performed. So he just used the paint that he had at his cabin, just that forest green. And so everybody's always kept that green.
Yeah, both the Deuce and Ferdinand were both green boats, and you know, I had talked to the grandson of Claire Jacobs here not too many years ago, and he said, "Yeah, I had 2 days in my life that were always happy and sad, and I'm not sure which way it was. I think it was the other way around. Like sad was when Grandpa wanted to get the boat out, which that meant a lot of work, and then happy when got off the ice, put away for another year. But he always said, yeah, we used to go to the cottage and go to the old shed out back, and we had to put a fresh coat of paint on every year. It's just old flat green paint, nothing fancy. I wasn't going to make the boat go any faster. So that's
right.
what needless to say. Now she's done in a.
Yeah, it also might be interesting to note who owned the bull. Who that when it came out of Detroit, Buddy Melgus bought it.
So Buddy Melgus, our Olympic sailor, which just passed away in the last couple of years here out of Lake Geneva, back in the early 60s, that is when all these boats changed owners. The Debutante went up to Menominee, the Deuce and Ferdinand came out of Detroit, which they had been sitting for a number of years in storage. They came to Lake Geneva. Actually, the Deuce went to Pewaukee, and it was owned there for a number of years. And I mean, a lot of these boats, John Buckstaff died in 60, and so like I said, the Deb went up north to Menominee. So I mean, Taku, my dad's old boat, that went down to Lake Geneva, and so there was a big exchange of ownership then, and to keep these old girls still sailing. Next. So we go from old, very, very traditional boat, which is a lateen rig stern steer on the left, which surprisingly, that style rig held a 108 mile an hour record out east for many years. And then you go to, which is what we're seeing now in the A Skeeter class. It's an enclosed cockpit. It has an airplane canopy. So, I mean, you basically gain another 10% of efficiency, plus a very comfortable ride. You don't have that wind hitting you directly in the face and cold. So And of course, you see the sail because that one's graphicked up a little bit, but it's a black carbon sail. So the efficiency of these boats, they can sail in 5-mile-an-hour winds, and in changing different sail configurations, they can sail up into the 20-mile-an-hour winds. And these boats will hit easily over 100 mile an hour. The big thing with the modern day boats are they can achieve the higher speeds at a much lower wind speed. Basically, we always figure 3 to 5 times the speed of the wind. These Skeeters are 5 to 6 times the speed of the wind a lot of days.
Yeah, and I'd also like to note the skipper on the left is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The Roosevelts have a very long history with ice sailing. You can go to the FDR library. I think it's on the Hudson River, and his ice boats are there. And his uncle also was very influential in ice sailing. But again, as Mike mentioned, once the icebreakers came through, that kind of affected Hudson River ice boating. But I know at one point, Roosevelt, when he was president, was able to call the Coast Guard or whoever is in charge of ice breaking and have them stand down so that they could have an ice boat regatta.
That is a correct story, yes. And now, once again, out east, they are finding a lot of small inland lakes further north, and where they've been able to sail. And of course, once again, ice boating in its early days, you used to just take the old hay wagon and take the boat down to the lake. Well, nowadays you got to have a good trailer, because that's the only way you're going to sail. You got to be able to go where the ice is, and usually it's not in your own backyard. Next. And we have another video.
Yeah, this is.
So it looks like we have a drone view here of a current ice boat regatta.
Yeah, 2023 ISA.
Go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, this is drone video from the 2023 ISA sailed on Lake Kegonsa near Madison, Wisconsin. And you can see there's an A Skeeter. That's Tom Hislop from Pewaukee. What do we have here? That's Eagle from John Dennis. There's from Green Bay. That's from Madison.
Minnesota.
Skeeter. Yep. B Skeeters.
You got the B Skeeters. Yep. Lake Geneva.
Yeah, so drone photography has been really good for ice boating. Next. And here we have Paula, the first bow steerer in the country. Do you want to talk about that, Mike? Or
sure, yeah. So the bow steers, they pretty much were evolved in that Lake Geneva area, and there were several builders down there. Was it the BEAU Skeeter Company, and the boats were small back then. They had a lot of sail on them. You can see how long the booms are on them. The cockpits sometimes were kind of open. Sometimes they had a little deck on them. And of course, you had a tiller in front of you, as way before foot steering came about. And
what would be the advantages of front steering versus the stern? Can you explain that?
So the big thing, well, number one is a stern steer is much more complicated. There's more wires to connect. There's more rigging to connect on a stern steer. A stern steer does the one thing that most bow steers don't do, and they will spin. And it's kind of like pushing that shopping cart from the front, and with the swivel wheels there and everything, and you try driving that thing, it's very difficult. That's why you're always pushing it in the back of a shopping cart. So there's like a tow motor, like a forklift. It's you just don't go fast with them. Well, you'll say stern steers go very fast, but they're also can be very stable if they aren't proportionally. The rudder plank isn't in the correct position. The mast is not right. It's not the correct angle of the mast. Maybe the sail's too full. It can make life very interesting. The bow steer is a much more user-friendly boat. You can get in that boat and you're not going to get in trouble. You might tip over, you might, but the stern steer will just give you an experience of a lifetime. It's, and also the bow steers are much lighter and they're simpler to rig.
Next.
You Deb?
Yep. Yeah, so I guess here we talked about the rudder in the front. And there's a October 1932 Popular Mechanics rudder in the front designed by Walter Beauvais from Lake Geneva. And there's another drawing from a Class E boat Skeeter plan from the book Wings on the Ice. And they were called Skeeters. They used to call them, it was the mosquito class, right?
Yes.
So
And you just look at how a bug kind of with those spindly little legs are up high up off the ground, and that's kind of what the Skeeter is. You know, the stern steer looks much more heavier and planted to the ice.
Yeah. Next.
Go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, next. And there's an original, there's still a few around, and there's one that is from Lake Geneva, the Goes family. So that is Pike. It was built by Walter Beauvais and Harry Melgus, that's Buddy's father, in 32 and 33. Harry Melgus sailed her to victory in the first Northwest Regatta Championship in 1935. And you can still see Pike. They set her up at swap meets, and when Lake Geneva has ice, you can see her. Next. Palmer Boat Company. What do you have anything that you know about that, Mike?
So the Palmer Boat Company was another one of those, I think it was Fontana, down Lake Geneva area. And they really were one of the first mass produced racing bow steer ice boats. And they're exquisitely built extremely light, beautiful boats. And they also did some cockpits, like where they put two cockpits behind the mast, and which was kind of unique, so you could always take a passenger for a ride or something like that. And the Palmers, you know, there's quite a few Palmers around. Actually, in one of our earlier slides here, they had the Edna there in front of the Oshkosh Yacht Club. That was a Palmer, and it's just one of the early boats. Palmer actually built boats probably for 20 to 25 years. And they got into a much larger Skeeter or bow steer boat. So they were progressive. And then, of course, eventually the custom builders came along. And ice boating was a little bit of a downswing then, too. So it was getting more in the hands of the amateur builder. Next.
Yeah, and this is something from Madison. I'm from Madison. We went a different way, again, going back to Carl Bernard, who we've mentioned before. He looked to the Germans, to monotypes, which Mike has sailed a monotype in, where were you?
I was in Sweden.
Yes.
Yeah, with the worlds there.
So Carl Bernard kind of patterned his front steer after a German monotype. Next. And again, this is someone that when I was a kid, he's always around. One of my dad's best friends, Jack Ripp. Beautiful boat here with a tall rig. Do you remember this boat, Mike?
I remember the boat. And I think that was still when they were doing the E class. And you go, once again, good comparison picture. If you remember here a couple slides back, they had the modern E Skeeters with the bubble and everything. Well, that's where this boat was 2 generations before that. So It's been a constant evolution with the Skeeters.
Yeah, and you'll see the Skeeter on the sail, and this is on Lake Monona in Madison. And you can see smoke coming from the power plant. Lake Monona was consistently good for sailing in the 40s and 50s because the power plant burned coal, and coal melts ice. But it was hell on runners, what I understand. Next. And here we have a really nice example of the evolution of the Skeeter class. Paul Kruger's boats. He's a Four Lakes Ice Yacht Club member. I've known him my whole life. Hope he's watching. So in Skeeter started out under the boom, all the way up until the 70s, from the 30s to the 70s. Paul was in a collision on Pewaukee Lake sometime in the 70s, and he figured, well, because he couldn't see, so he came up with the idea of moving the cockpit behind the sail, which gave for better visibility. Eventually, the boats, the idea of a cockpit forward boat, which you see what they're sailing now, that came kind of a hybrid of, actually, my late husband, Harry Whitehorse, designed one out of aluminum in the 70s, but it really was Dan Clapp from New Jersey who built the first real fast cab forward Skeeter. Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, the interesting, once again, going back to a couple of our slides earlier, like Deb said here, that first one you sat under the boom, but you'll notice, the boats are getting bigger now. They're getting taller. They're getting wider. The booms are getting shorter on them. Now they have an added piece to them, which out the front of the boat, you'll see what they call a springboard. And that's another piece of suspension. Makes the boat ride much better, plus extends the overall length of the boat. That's the biggest thing. I mean, so, the rig has stayed similar, but now going to the front bubble boats now, the masts are much straighter up and down. The booms are shorter yet. And then if you can see on the picture there, the end of the boom is down quite a bit lower. They call those the fastback. The first bubble boats, the deck for the mast was straight back. And then they found out if you can make the back of the sail longer, the boat's going to go faster. So that's when the fastback was evolved. And so that's where the e-Skeeters, which are the evolutionary boats, state-of-the-art boats, are now in the ice boat world. Next.
Yeah, that's a nice picture of a rumble seater. And that was Pat Heppert, quote, "Best ride on planet Earth." They're still really fun boats.
Just an incredible ride, because with the bubble boats now, all you're seeing basically is a bit of a bow of your boat and your steer runner. But back when you're sitting in the stern, like a stern steer, you're watching the whole show going on ahead of you, and it makes life a little bit more exciting. Plus, you'll notice with that rumble seat, as they called them back then, when the boat hikes or goes up in the air, you're going up with the boat too, which is not a good thing to do, especially if the mast does collapse. The boat does come on top of you then. So, next.
And this is Bill Madison, again, a member of the Four Lakes Ice Yacht Club. You see the picture on the bottom. He built every one of those boats. Bill and Paul Kruger Bill had a shop in Madison. If any regattas happen and someone, broke their boat, you take it over to Madison's. He'll fix it. He was incredibly generous with his time, and he built so many Skeeters. I just can't even imagine. He won so many championships. You can see on the top picture on the right, he's with Buddy Melgus. Buddy brought him on board on some of the America's Cup challenges. And the picture on the bottom was from a magazine article. So quite a bit about him on our website, iceboat.org. Next. And here we have modern Skeeters. There's 3 Skeeters in this picture. Your rear buckets, rear seat, a Bemke B Skeeter, or Bowcraft as they're known, and a cockpit forward. This was on Lake Winnebago in 2010. Next. And here we have a sea Skeeter. It has a smaller sail plan than an A Skeeter. This design was created by Pat Heppert, originally from the Lake Geneva area, up in Minnesota now. This is a just beautiful boat. And it's a lot lighter than an A Skeeter. You have anything to add on that, Mike?
So yeah, the really big thing with the C Skeeters, it's like Deb said, it's smaller than the A Skeeter, much more manageable in physical size and weight and cost. And the big limitation, or the limitation on the C Skeeter, is a 20-foot mast. So it's a locked-in design. So and there's probably about 5 of them in existence now. So Pat is slowly progressing the class here, and so right now it's not it races with the B Skeeters, the Bemke Skeeters now. So, and it usually beats them pretty easily.
You can see a nice example of that fastback on the back, how it slopes down. So next. And here we have, we're into the one design ice boats. They all kind of come out of the Skeeter. This is the Renegade class. The Renegades were developed by Elmer Millenbach in the Detroit area after World War II. Wisconsin has quite a large fleet of Renegades. And it's a one design, so it's always got to, they have specifications they have to honor and everything. Do you have anything to add? Do you have a Renegade?
So the Renegades, yeah, I mean, they're still very active at all our regattas. We just had the International Skeeter Association regatta up in Minnesota several weeks ago, and we had a good showing of the Renegades. And of course, then they also have their class in the Northwest Iceboat Regatta. But very good sailors come out of there, and like I say, Deb said, it's a very strict one design boat. It's kind of a time warp from the 1940s, and it's still going well. Next.
And here we have the Bowcraft B Skeeters designed by Bill Bemke. I think he was living in Northern Illinois when he did these. These are beautiful Skeeters. This is a Cadillac ride, also known as a side-by-side. The cockpits are wider. They can take people in them, but when they race, they race with one. And this is the fleet on Lake Geneva. It's their home lake. Do you have anything to add on this?
I think, once again, the Bemke is a very strict one design boat. And, what's great with the Bemke is, it's people say it's a time warp. Well, yeah, but everyone else has the same boat. So, but it's kind of where the Skeeters were back in the 60s, except like Deb said, it can also, you could take a passenger for a joyride also. Next.
I'll let Mike take this because this is what
Sure.
he's.
So this is the night class. It was came about in the 1970s out of Pewaukee, Wisconsin, by Dick Slates out of S&R Marine. Kind of like the Bemke. It is a side-by-side boat. We race only one person in them, but you can also take a passenger with them. Very, very strict one design. There's approximately 600 nights that have been built, and the hulls have to come out of the S&R Marine business in Pewaukee to stay in the one design class. You can build the wood parts, the mast, the springboard, and the runner plank on your own. But on our nights when we race, we usually have about 30 boats on the line. So. And also, they are a fiberglass hull, which has been great, extremely tough, very low maintenance. Next.
And here we have the DN. I'm involved with the DN class. These were developed in the 1930s from a contest sponsored by the Detroit News during the Depression to make a real easy home buildable, easy to transport boat. They've definitely changed since the 1930s. They have modern rigs. It is the largest iceboat class in the world. There's a world championship that alternates between Europe and North America. The worlds are in North America this year, perhaps in Michigan. And there's generally 2 or 3 fleets in each championship. There can be, well over 100 boats registered. So these are very popular boats. In the Four Lakes Ice Yacht Club, they were always a beginner boat, but they've evolved so much right now. They're a really lively, fast boat. I think did you ever have a DN, Mike?
I have had a DN back in the 70s. It was my first boat, and it was fun. It was just a fun boat. But like you said, Deb, they have evolved, and really it's in the rig. I mean, they've raked the mast back further, but the big thing is developing the carbon fiber mast. So no matter what strength of wind you have, you design the mast to your body weight and everything. And these boats can sail in extreme conditions and still be relatively safe. And of course, performance is incredible compared to the earlier boats.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out that that photo is of a young lady who's Maggie McGarry. She's 14 years old, and she's racing DNs. She's from Minnesota, and this was taken a couple of weeks ago up in Minnesota. So, and I think she got 3rd place in her fleet.
Yes.
All right.
Next.
And here we have one of the ice sailing legends of the DN fleet, and other, Jane Pagel, very influential with her husband Bob on ice sailing, contributed a lot. She won many championships, and you can see there's a picture of her. That's an old style rig, kind of a stiffer mast, and which made the DN tend to hike a lot. The modern rigs with the flexibility, they squat a lot better. But Jane I think she won a North American championship. Just, heck of a sailor.
If I could add to that, Jane is still around yet. I think she's in her early 90s, maybe, and
Yeah.
great conversationalist. But once again, I mean, if there's anything to do with DN, she's pretty much won it. I mean, she was just always there for the sport, very supportive. But going back to that photo there, like Deb said, I mean, look at the straight mast. That was the old Sitka spruce mast before. If it bent a couple inches, that was considered a lot. Look at the runner plank, how stiff it is. Going back to that picture a couple slides back, how negative the plank was. And so all this helps in the ride and helps in the performance. When you get that puff of wind, everything squats and bends and the boat goes forward. So it's a faster, much more stable boat.
Next. And these are Ice Optimist. Maybe you've heard of the Optimist class. The kids go out and sail on soft water, as we call it. Well, they can take their rig and put it on a little hull designed for kids. It's a trainer. Very popular in Europe. I've been to championships, the Junior World Championships in Europe, where they'll have 120 kids that show up for this from all over Europe. So they're available here. If you know any kids that want to get into ice boating, contact Mike or myself, and we can connect you with, some Ice Optimist boats. Next. This was Mike's sent me the Action Comics. So super.
Ice boating in its heyday. I mean, everyone got involved in it. Everything, from the cigarette companies to the stove companies to the comic books. I mean, it was just so popular back in the day. And I think there's a 1948 here with Superman here helping that little stern steer along. And of course, a lot of your popular science, modern mechanics, they all offered plans and articles on the ice boating because, everyone wanted to have one.
Next. So this is the National Sailing Hall of Fame in Newport, Rhode Island. This is a big deal. These are all the ice boaters in that Hall of Fame. You'll note Jane Pagel, who we talked about, Buddy Malgus, Madison, the Harkins, they're in Pewaukee, Wisconsin, Peter Barrett, Bill Benston. The Gouchons are from Michigan, but they sailed here a lot. So Wisconsin is well represented in the National Sailing Hall of Fame. Next. Questions?
Okay, and we have time for 2 questions.
Any questions?
You didn't have anything to do with the South Bay scooters.
No, that's next time. That'll be the next presentation.
All right.
Yeah, that's not Wisconsin. These are 2 Class A Skeeters on Lake Kegonsa.
JESO and JD.
Yep.
And 1 question over there, ma'am.
Well, I was just wondering, so the boat itself never hits the ice, it's whatever is on the end of those legs?
Yeah, there's 3 points.
Okay,
3
and
points
then
hit the
what is
ice.
that made of?
So those are runners. They're steel. So they're steel runners, and they have a razor sharp edge or 45-degree angle on them, unlike an ice skate. So,
Oh,
and then you put a little bit of rock in them, and you have a flat, what they call, and everything. And once again, one design, So, but the big stern steers, they could be up to 7 feet long, because especially with the weight of the boat.
All right.
One more.
Okay, 1 more.
I'm curious about the cost of these boats.
So a new Knight one design, which is built in Pewaukee, is approximately $12,000. A DN, which are worldwide right now, you can pick up a good used one up for about $1,200, and you can't even buy the hardware or the sails for that right now. And there's a number of them for sale. A competitive one is probably anywhere 10,000 and up. And the modern Skeeters, those bubble boats, 30,000 and up. So.
Great. Well, thank you. Nick. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this Think and Drink tonight. Again, thank you to the Packers Grant Foundation for sponsoring this program in part. And also, if you like programs like this, make sure that you check out our membership options. That's one of the best ways to support the museum. So we've got brochures over here, or you can ask any staff members. Also, keep an eye out for our upcoming programs. We've got a new exhibit opening on January 17th. We have a dive into the archives, which is actually with me on January 31st. And so you'll see some artifacts that are not currently on display. And we also have our next Think and Drink in February. That is going to be the Polar Badgers. So with UW Madison and the work that they do in Antarctica on the South Pole. So make sure you grab one of our calendars of events. And thank you again. And thanks, Mike and Deb, so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.